Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my honor to be the anchor of a discussion between the Ambassador Christoph Heusgen. The Ambassador Heusgen is a very experienced man in today's world. He was working with Angela Merkel as her diplomatic advisor for a long time. And now he is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference. Next to Ambassador Heusgen, the other partner in today's discussion is Professor Loukas, who also has a great experience in European matters. But I would like to give the floor to Henri Bohnet, who is heading the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung office in Athens. Konrad-Adenauer with ELIAMEP are co-organizing this discussion. Mr. Bohnet, you have the floor.
Yassas, hello and welcome. I am Henri Bohnet and I welcome you to our today's discussion on the war in Ukraine and its implications for Europe and the world. With this event, we hope to shed some light on how Germany sees the Russian aggression, how it has come to change its behavior, its long-held stance towards Putin, and where this conflict in Ukraine might lead. Let me just say that Germany's first chancellor after the Second World War, Konrad-Adenauer, was under no illusion when it came to Moscow and the Soviet Union. Back after the end of the Second World War, he clearly positioned Germany inside the security architecture of the United States, inside the newly founded NATO, and he helped build the foundations of what is now the European Union. To this end, he risked and he tolerated the division of Germany for many decades between East and West, and the occupation of half of Germany by the Soviet Union. It seems like today, we are at a similar juncture in European history that will determine and decide the political geography of Europe for years to come. So in this context, I hope today's discussion can give us a sense of direction at this turning point of where we have to go, where we should go. And I'm very pleased that we have the two experts, Mr. Heusgen and Mr. Tsoukalis, today with us. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I thank Tasos Telloglou for his moderation, and I thank our partners from ELIAMEP for cooperating with us. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henri Bohnet. And I would like to pass the floor direct to Christoph Heusgen. I know that he spent a lot of his time as an advisor of the ex-chancellor trying to fix the problem that popped up in Ukraine after 2014. Did you expect things to have this result?
First, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to organizations to put this on the agenda. I was indeed advisor to Chancellor Merkel from 2005 until 2017. And I went through many up and downs during this time. And of course, what was important for us was the crisis in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, and then the occupation of parts of the Donbass. I was there with the Chancellor in the negotiations, in particular in the negotiations which led to the Minsk agreement. There were several, but the decisive one was then 8 years ago, where President Putin, Poroshenko, Hollande, and Chancellor Merkel negotiated with their advisors all through a night. What was the situation at that stage, I abbreviate things, was that the Russian military was advancing. The Ukrainians at that time told us that, actually that was in February 2014, the Ukrainian army was basically crushed, and it would have been possible for President Putin at the time to actually advance with the troops further towards Kiev. It was possible at that time to stop this, to come to a political solution, and we had the Minsk agreement, and with many discussions in the so-called Normandy format over years, one tried to actually implement the agreement and have pacify the region. This was not possible. I don't want to go into the details. It didn't work out. So when we saw the tensions rising with all the maneuvers of the troops, of the Russian troops, there was, of course, now many of the Americans told us clearly we didn't believe it to a certain degree that Russia was at it again. Then we were 10 days ago at the Munich Security Conference, and what was apparent there was something that I haven't witnessed for a long time, and that is there was a lot of transatlantic international unity in support of Ukraine, in support of the NATO alliance, in support of the defense of international law. I must say, I was personally, then I thought that Putin would, because he had to climb down from the tree, he would be happy by basically saying Minsk doesn't work. They would pretend that and then say, for these reasons, we recognize as independent countries Donetsk and Lugansk, and that I thought was sufficient for him. But as we witnessed, it wasn't, and Putin started an all-out war. An all-out war that we are witnessing that is costing many, many lives, that is destroying Ukraine. And as we are following the political development, you have all seen the vote in the General Assembly yesterday. We'll see the sanctions that go beyond anything we have seen before, because the violation of international law by Russia or by Putin is such that there's no explanation for it. Russia is sidelined. Russia will be, and Putin in particular, will be an outcast from the international community soon. What are the reasons? And then I want to stop. Why in 2015, where it was possible, he didn't do it? Why does it do it today? There is no change in the basic position. He always said, well, NATO is advancing. We all know that is not the case. There is no new development on enlarging NATO towards East since the Bucharest summit in 2008, where it was clearly stated that neither Georgia nor Ukraine would get the membership action plan, nor would they get then the full membership, so there's no plan. So what are the reasons? There's one reason is that Putin, or let me say there is one circumstance and two reasons. One circumstance is Corona. Putin was for 2 years in isolation. You have seen the latest photos when he is meeting people, the distance between him and the people. When people wanted to see him, they had to go into a quarantine of a week or so. So he has not seen anybody, and he has been left alone with himself. And he has been, I think, over time has created his own impression of the world, of world politics, of where he, and then he must have read some historic books and about the glory of Russia, and that Ukraine is part of Russia and the Ukrainians want to be that. There is no Ukrainian identity. So he said that this is it's part of Russia, and we have to now have Ukraine return to it. Number two, he has so number one, Corona. Number two is, of course, what he has been saying from the very beginning, that the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century was the end of the Soviet Union, because it left so many Russians outside of the borders, and he thinks it's time now to re-establish this Russian empire, and Ukraine is a part of this. He has been very active also in Moldova, in Georgia. We have seen his activities in Belarus. These are all former Russian republics. And then there is one very simple point. and that is a new nationalism which comes out of the fact that Putin has seen over the years how the population in Eastern Europe, in the former Soviet Union, getting sick and tired of what I call a post-Soviet oligarchic society. We have all witnessed the revolutions in Georgia, in Moldova, in Ukraine. We have seen the aborted revolution in Belarus last year. We have seen Kazakhstan, and Putin, who witnessed when he came back as president for a third period in 2012 that people also in Russia were demonstrating. He was scared that the winds of change would also blow in Russia. Therefore, he has systematically shut out all oppositions. Nemtsov was killed, Navalny was poisoned. We witnessed the end of civil society in Russia. There are no more civil society organizations. The most acknowledged one, Memorial, was closed a few months ago. The media have been silenced. So there is no opposition anymore, no civil society, vibrant civil society. And what do people in this situation do? We know it, and I seeing how he proceeds. One needs to compare it with somebody like Hitler, or also compare it a bit to the policy of the Chinese. Not that I want to compare them, but also if you see the policy of Chinese President Xi is a nationalistic one. With a new nationalism, you start to try to rally the population behind. He saw that after 2012, when his popularity was very low, that by invading Ukraine, by annexing Crimea, his popularity went up. And now with this nationalism, neo-nationalism, he also tries, of course, to support his own popularity, to strengthen popularity in his own country. He has totally misjudged it. The Ukrainians are a people. There is a Ukrainian identity. It has been actually strengthened by Russian aggression. I don't see that there is a chance that the Russian army will conquer Ukraine. Ukraine, I'm sure, will turn out as a Vietnam for Russia. He has underestimated the unity of the international community. When I was walking home from my office here at home, I saw about 100 school children, German school children, age 8 or 9, walking the streets, all waving the Ukrainian flag. In the school of my son, they're now collecting packages. We have a system of welcoming refugees from Ukraine in the Berlin train station, bringing to families. We had 500,000 people very spontaneously on the streets in Berlin last Sunday, and this is a worldwide movement. So this is not going to end well for Putin. Putin brought his country into total isolation, and this is a big crisis we are in. And we can only speculate how this is going to end. Now, I call a spade, and therefore I was pretty clear. But this is how I see the situation. And Professor, maybe you are of a different view.
No, I don't think I am of a different view. We have a terrible war in Ukraine, a war we did not expect because we didn't have a full-scale war in Europe for several decades. We thought those terrible things happen constantly in other parts of the world, but no longer in Europe. We were proven wrong by Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin, for years, has tried to draw red lines. His red lines included further NATO expansion, He also wanted the implementation, as you mentioned, of the Minsk agreements, which in his eyes would guarantee not only decentralization of Ukraine, but also a kind of indirect veto on Ukraine's membership of NATO. Why he decided to go all the way now is difficult for me to judge. I mean, you presented a personal reason, among others, which may actually be very important. I mean, Russia is now an autocracy where power is in the hands of one person. And this is always a very dangerous state of affairs, to have just one person talking to himself and taking no different advice from anybody else. And sometimes, you know, in my part of the world, we know this from neighbors, and we get worried then. I personally did not expect him to go all the way. Together with you, I thought he would most probably recognize the two so-called independent republics. He might even move in with his troops to make sure that they are secure in his sphere of influence. But launching a full-scale invasion on Ukraine can prove to be suicidal, because he clearly underestimated the resistance he would meet in his neighboring country. He probably also never weighed properly the reaction of the Europeans, including notably the Germans, and the Western alliance in general. So the economic cost for Russia will be very high. But also the idea that you go into Ukraine, and first of all, it is a quick operation. And second, assuming that you are successful in having a quick operation and you take over Kiev, you overthrow the government, you install a government of your own liking. But how do you expect to control a country of the size of Ukraine? And it's lunacy. The cost in terms of human lives in trying to do that, unless you are actually convinced that Ukrainians do not exist, that, you know, you move in and most people will greet you as a liberator. And this is clearly wrong. So we are entering a very difficult situation. If I see it difficult, what is going to be the way out? Because you have to have a decent way out for all the parties concerned. Otherwise, it's going to be an absolute disaster in terms of human lives and physical catastrophe. And I don't see easily what can be the way out, a way out that leaves Putin. Remember, I mean, Putin's Russia may have clearly miscalculated, but it also needs a way out, because this is a country that is heavily armed. It has the first or the number 2 nuclear arsenal in the world. And you do not, I mean, and this, because I'm not an appeaser, but you do not want to squeeze the opposite side into a corner, especially if the opposite side is very heavily armed and is getting desperate. So I'm really worried about what is going to come out of this. Of course, I sympathize with the tragedy of Ukrainians, but things can get worse, and this is really alarming.
Things can get worse before they can get better. So I want to throw two subjects in the discussion. The first subject is, what could be the common ground of a way out? Is there any? Because I can't see any for the time being. Maybe in a few hours there should be any, but I heard Lavrov this morning, and I didn't listen to anything new except from a tone and a small phrase that the Ukrainians can make the choice of their will. which is not exactly what they said about the Zelensky government at the beginning of the operation. But is there any common ground of the way out? And the second question is, it needs some resilience also from the side of the Europeans. Let me explain what I mean. The Europeans have done a tremendous leap forward, but Russia has still some leverage in its hands vis-à-vis the Europeans, which is energy. If you exhaust all sanctions, then at the end of the way, you meet energy. And then you have to prove that you are resilient enough to go in that field. If you go that far, do you think that Europe is going to touch that?
Ambassador, you want to go first?
I'm afraid I have to, since you spoke before, but I must say I don't have an answer to this. I think that first of all, I don't think that there will be common ground between Ukraine and Russia. I just don't see it. I think that Ukraine, with all their national pride, and they will not accept anything short of the status quo ante. I think that the Ukrainians will even insist on saying, okay, we are ready to tell the international community to allow you back into the society of civilized nations if you give back the Donbass and Crimea. This is the spirit of the Ukrainians. No way that Russia is going to do it. So I don't think it will get, number one, worse before it can get better. For me, the only hope is, which is a very remote hope, that with the drastic sanctions, with the total isolation, not only of Putin, but his government, his society, his companies, sports, that the Russian people will not accept that and stage a coup d'etat. But I don't think we are there. I think that in a totalitarian system like the Russian ones, Putin has things under control. This may change, but it may change in particular if there are more dead. I remember in 2015, one of the reasons why Putin then stopped at the time, that there were the organization of mothers of fallen soldiers who were starting to create problems. Now, we are certainly not there yet. Europe, I see, because my country is the country that is has the, unfortunately, I must say, the highest dependency on gas and oil from Russia. I think the way that Putin has now brutally, and you see it every day on the screens, the way that Putin has brutally attacked Russia, I think you will see a readiness in Germany. I may be wrong, but the sentiment right now is, yes, we are ready to even to give up Russian oil and gas. I mean, it's suicidal, you would say. But at least for this winter and including summer, there is enough gas. This is what von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, insisted on during the Munich Security Conference. There is now a rush towards LNG. There is even a discussion in Germany with our Greens. We're not there yet, but to extend the life of nuclear power plants. This is something that is, a total no-go, but Putin has changed it. So I think we'll see still a toughening of the European before maybe thinking about an opening, which could be in the end a part of a package to allow Russia back to the table. But right now, I don't see a new Minsk agreement where we find some kind of compromise or so. I just don't see it. So on this happy note to you.
Well, I'm not optimistic either. I mean, I don't see an easy way out in the immediate future, an easy way out of this war. I'm afraid what could have been realistic compromise solutions before the war, they are no longer available. I have to put my cards on the table. I have always been among those in the West who believed that raising the question of Ukraine's membership of NATO was a mistake. But so this should not have been raised in the first place, given geography, history, and everything else. But even now, I mean, the idea that, Ukraine does not join NATO and accepts a fairly decentralized structure cannot be possible. I mean, one thing that could have been possible a few months before the war is no longer possible. So that's why I'm afraid there is no obvious way out. And that, if true, and I hope I'm proven wrong, but if I'm not, this is going to translate into huge human suffering and further physical catastrophe. Now, the other thing about Europe, inadvertently, of course, Mr. Putin may become one of the greatest unifiers of Europe, not only the Atlantic Alliance, but of Europe. And the decisions taken by the German government, most notably, not only to take measures against Russia in terms of sanctions, not only in terms of sending armaments, military equipment to Ukraine, but even more so to increase military expenditure, may open the way for a much closer European defense cooperation within the context of the Atlantic Alliance. So that could be the next big step of European unification. I'm sure Mr. Putin did not want to achieve that, but we may end up with such a thing. I mean, remember, after all, the big moments of big turning points of European unification are linked to big historical events. And one of them was the fall of the Berlin Wall and German unification that led to the creation of the euro. Well, let us see what happens now.
One question you already raised, is in the case we have some ending of that, and we will have some ending of that, what we're seeing now of that war, Ukraine should need some security guarantees, whatever you call them. I don't know what we're going to call them, but Ukraine would probably need, it's logical this, after what has happened, some kind of security guarantees. In the Protocol of Budapest of 1994, there were some vague security guarantees, and there were 3 countries guaranteeing that Ukraine should scrap its nuclear weapons vis-a-vis some protection, between them Russia too. So this has to be Budapest plus, or a lot much plus than Budapest. What kind of security guarantees could international community provide to a country like that, if it's not NATO?
I think you raise a very important point, and the Budapest Memorandum is a key document there, because the failure to implement it will have disastrous effects on countries in the future that are asked to disarm, because what did the Ukrainians get in response? Occupation of their country. The question is, of course, if not, speculating there is an end to the conflict, will the Bucharest decision be revisited? The decision that said no membership action plan, will it then get membership? My argument has always been, the NATO treaty is so fundamental for the security of its members. We have to we also have to respect not only Article 5 but also Article 10. Article 10 says that countries can only join if they bring or add security to the alliance. And only if the conflict is resolved and Russia has made some guarantees that they will not, then I think there will be a readiness to actually now go ahead with having Ukraine being member of the council. I don't see that for the time being. I see it as you have just outlined, that if and when, I hope it's only a question of time, this war will end. I'm sure that the international community will say we cannot leave Ukraine alone without the means to defend itself. In 2015, when we came back from the Minsk negotiations, it was again the time of the Munich Security Conference. We had Senator McCain, who was saying, you have to send weapons now to Ukraine. They have to be able to defend themselves. They need to get it. And I must say, it was among others German Chancellor Merkel who said, well, if they get weapons, they'll have the feeling that they can reconquer, and the Russians will always have more weapons. And therefore, from then until last Sunday, Germany said, we don't send any weapons to Ukraine. This has changed now. This has changed, and this may be an opening. I was, when we are always asked now, wasn't it a mistake not to give them weapons? I think that once we had the Minsk agreement, it was right to really try to implement it, not militarize Ukraine. But at a certain moment in the last month, I think we should have seen that Putin no longer follows the political track, but has his military, and we should have started maybe earlier to arm them. So again, I don't see membership, but I do see a much stronger military support for the Ukrainians.
But of course, it is very difficult to speculate about the kind of security guarantees we offer to Ukraine post-war unless we first have the war ended and we know how the war has ended.
Of course.
Because what seem to be the aims of the Russian army? Clearly, I think it involves dismemberment. It involves parts of Ukraine coming under direct or indirect Russian control. And that would be an unsustainable situation. It would be a situation that no Ukrainian government will ever accept. And this would be a situation that no Western government would be able to accept. So if that happens, we will be starting from an almost impossible deadlock. I also find it very difficult to guess, or rather to see, how Putin, unless the pressures inside grow dramatically inside Russia, how Putin is going to go short of the minimum of things that he wants to achieve in Ukraine, because he cannot afford a defeat. He cannot simply withdraw from Ukraine and say, sorry, we made a mistake. We take our troops back and all this, and God, everything is forgiven. He can't do that. So that's why I was saying we have to think of ways out for everybody involved, because Russia is there and is going to be part of a more difficult Europe to coexist with others than it was before this war started. I mean, the implications for Europe and for European security are very bad indeed.
I don't see this way out. We discussed this earlier in our discussion that Ukraine can climb up the tree as far as Putin is climbing down. I just don't see that there is a match. So I totally agree with you. This is a horrible crisis, and the Ukrainians would say, why are we now having to give in for some only because this crazy guy just overstretched and got himself on a tree and afterwards cutting all possibility to climb down. So this is why I said earlier, maybe diplomacy has find something. I see it only in an overthrow of Putin back home. I don't see any way out there short of this, and the likelihood at this stage is pretty low, I must say.
I agree.
Can I ask you one question? Sorry if I ask you what I've been thinking a lot. I don't know what do you see, Loukas, with regard to China? We see China sitting a bit on the how do you say it in English? There
on the fence.
Yeah, sorry, sitting on the getting old. Sitting on the fence. When they see how things are developing, when they see how much Putin is maneuvering in the corner, that their support in the Security Council is becoming more and more problematic, that pressure more will rise. Well, there is one country that has some possibility. Do you see any chance that China will pressure Russia, or is this also dreaming?
Well, I can think of different scenarios. The worst scenario is to throw Mr. Putin into the arms of Mr. Xi and vice versa, because that could be not a future a prospect we can relish, anybody. It's interesting that China seems to be taking a very cautious line. It does not condemn Russian invasion, but at the same time, it's abstaining in UN Security Council votings. It is saying that China has always been respecting frontiers, and it is against the violent change of frontiers. China is not keen on this thing going on. Although, if you wish, I mean, if I wanted to have an extreme, almost conspiratorial scenario, it could be convenient for China to shift Western attention to Europe as opposed to having a US pivot to Asia. It's much better getting the Americans worrying about what happens in Ukraine than threatening the Chinese and wanting to take every measure possible to make sure that the rise of China does not challenge US supremacy. So, but if this goes on further, I mean, China finds itself in an awkward position. I would guess that China might be an interesting partner in a future diplomatic intervention to stop the war. Although I don't see how exactly it's going to happen. But yes, China has stakes.
Until now, when we are approaching negotiations between two parties in war, we have a kind of ceasefire. My experience is that we always had ceasefires while discussing. Well, these two parties are very reluctant in stopping the battle for the time being, because probably each of them sees that it's an upside in continuing the battle, or am I interpreting that wrong?
I just missed, there was cutting. Could you just repeat it? I didn't get your question, sorry.
In similar cases, when we have wars like that, when the two parties approach a discussion ground, there is a kind of ceasefire, which we haven't seen in what we follow now in the last 8 days. And it seems to me that both parties think that there is an upside in continuing the fighting without gaining a little bit time. Or am I seeing that wrong?
I don't know. When you see how Russia is advancing now in the south there, Mariupol, Cherson, going to Odessa, around, maybe one could get the, I don't know, Ukrainians for a ceasefire. I just don't see that the Russians will do it. I mean, they've built up all the firepower. They have these 60 kilometers of trucks ready there, and from Putin's perspective, to stop halfway, once you have a ceasefire, it will be very, very difficult then to find a reason why they start again. They will outpour of rage over them, which is even worse than we have now. Additional sanctions. I don't see it, but I don't know, Loukas, do you see a possibility of a ceasefire right now?
I guess that Russia will not be interested in a ceasefire until they capture some of the key centers they wanted to capture in the first place. So before Russia occupies big centers on the eastern part of Ukraine, perhaps Kiev more difficult, they will have no interest whatsoever in accepting a ceasefire. That's my guess, and I'm not saying that with any delight. And otherwise, it's going to be defeat. I mean, they have to have, Putin has to have some concrete things to show for the, if I may say so, barbaric act he has committed.
You talked before about, indirectly, about the situation in the UN. Well, it's not the first time that we have this situation where a permanent member of the Security Council faces the rest of the organization practically, except of course from the abstaining China, India, etc. But this also stress underlines the need of a reform after so many decades. I know that in Germany there were some thoughts about that. What do you think about the UN future after what has happened?
Well, I was indeed for 4 years ambassador at the UN, 2 of these years in the Security Council. During the others, I was following the so-called IGN, the intergovernmental negotiations on a reform of the Security Council. It is the reform, I think we all agree, is very important to have the Security Council represent the realities of today in terms of composition, in terms of allowing Africa, Latin America more, giving more seats, more weight. These efforts were very, very cumbersome, and it was not. Russia was, stopping things, but they were not the worst. The worst were the Chinese. The Chinese have been militantly against a reform because they are afraid that their rivals in Asia, India, and Japan could get a seat. So they have been instrumentalizing the Africans not to make progress. I mean, you cannot explain to an outsider that until today the UN was not able to have text-based negotiations, to have just a text with all different options for a enlargement, more permanent, semi-permanent, more regional distribution, all this. was not able to put a negotiating text on the table. So I don't see that through this this will fundamentally change, because the Chinese interest is not changed. We can only, if we have a conflict where, I don't know, you had it after the Second World War when everybody was destroyed, devastated, and then people were ready to get the momentum for the Charter, for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I don't think we are there. I believe even today, we would not get the Charter. Today we would not get the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm pretty sure we wouldn't, because all these basic values that are in there, the basic rights, will not. It's not something that countries will want to respect. So. While I wish you were right that out of a crisis always comes the momentum, I see more transatlantic unity, European unity. There I really see advance. UN, I have my doubts. But Loukas, maybe you are of a different opinion.
No, I'm exactly of the same opinion. I'm afraid, because this doesn't help the discussion. If we. I believe that the invasion will play a catalytic role in transatlantic unity, and even more so, I hope, European unity. But it will not have much of an effect on the UN system. It is not going to be the first time that a great power totally ignores the overwhelming opinion expressed at the UN General Assembly, and I suspect it will not be the last. So I'm afraid we have to live with that. As you, Ambassador, having been there for many years, know, in the UN we are all equal, but some are more equal than others. And that's why they also have vetoes, which they have used repeatedly. And it's not only the Russians who have used vetoes repeatedly, on the contrary. So I don't expect any serious effect on the UN system. What I do, however, see is that European security questions will no longer return to the situation pre-invasion. We are in a different world.
Yeah, I'm afraid for the organizers, you put the panel is not very, very good, because we agree on too much.
I would like to ask a question, because Professor Tsoukalis always gets his last word out of my next question. So my next question would be: Putin and Sergei Lavrov today spent a lot of time and arguments about the future European architecture. Now we know that a part of this is justified from the past, but after what has happened, actually is masquerading a decision to invade a sovereign country. But I've read, before starting this discussion, I have read a very interesting information about tomorrow's schedule of President Biden. He will meet the Finnish president, and Mr. Blinken will meet the foreign minister of Finland. This was not scheduled. In other countries, except Ukraine, there is a huge discussion and a shifting in the population from neutrality, from the historic neutrality of that nations, closer to NATO. Well, I don't know whether it's anything imminent, but I know that in Finland, there is in the constitution a provision that if you have 50,000 signatories, then you can bring a law in the parliament. So these people have to raise their hands in the coming days. What do you think about European architecture after what has happened without Russia? Because Russia would be excluded for some time. Could it be European architecture without Russia?
Well, On Finland, I have said also in articles a few weeks ago already, Putin will achieve something he doesn't want to. And I by chance met with the Finnish ambassador here in Berlin yesterday, and she had really surprising polls. She said that for decades, the number of people in the polls in favor of a NATO accession was at around 20, 22, maximum 25%. This has gone up in a matter of like 2 weeks to more than 50%, solid 50%. And I didn't know that the president and the former were going to Washington, but I think this is something that they want to discuss with the president, because NATO membership, you don't go to Brussels and put the application on the table. You discuss it with the country that has to agree to extend then its nuclear deterrence to your country, because that's what NATO membership is about. So I think, I didn't know about the meeting, but this must be on the table. No? And if the Finns go, I'm sure the Swedes will come along. This is the architecture. And we discussed earlier what is going to happen with Ukraine. I also think that short of membership, we have to support the Moldovans. We have to support the, what is left of Georgia. I think we need to. These are the three countries that are them. Armenia, there is no chance. Armenia is under the firm control of Russia, and Azerbaijan is another world anyway. But I think that's what we going to see. Now, I hope that at least for once, the professor disagrees with me.
Well, it's interesting that the Putin effect seems to be similar and repeated in different countries. I mean, I remember reading opinion polls about 15 years, 20 years back in Ukraine, and the country was divided. There was no clear majority, as far as I remember, in favor of membership of NATO. And Putin, the way he was handling the situation in Ukraine, he had one very concrete effect, and that was the percentage of Ukrainians in favor of NATO membership was steadily going up. Now we are experiencing the same thing in Finland, and I suppose we'll be experiencing the same thing in Sweden. Can there be a European security architecture without Russia? I mean, this is the multi-trillion euro question. I've never believed that there can be a European security without or simply against Russia. But Mr. Putin may succeed in getting the whole of Europe against him. I believe, again, something I said before, that after the end of the Cold War, the dismantling of the Soviet Empire, the fall of Berlin, a huge opportunity was lost, and it was repeatedly lost in laying solid foundations for peace in Europe. And it was the result of the combined effort of Western hawks and Russian Siloviki. Siloviki stands for secret agents. The blame is not 100% on one side. This is a huge historical opportunity that was lost. We could have created conditions for long-lasting peace in Europe. And now we are paying the price. And of course, the Ukrainians are paying a much bigger price than anybody else.
I'm very happy that we finally found a reason to disagree.
Good. Good.
I do agree that a lot of mistakes were committed. I think that we, in particular the Americans, were too optimistic that after the fall of the Iron Curtain after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and then with a weak Russian president, Russia could turn into a second United States, a country with a democracy, with a market economy. I think that some people believed in it. I think that also many of us Europeans thought, okay, we have overcome the cleavages of the past, and we can live in peace with Russia. There was, the efforts by the European Union to have partnership agreements, association agreement with Russia. NATO had the NATO-Russia Council. And I think there was certainly the readiness to extend the very successful European architecture and include Russia. The miscalculation was that, which is until today, the miscalculation was that Russia had no intention to join the European Union or join NATO as a member, because as we see from psychology, as we see from Putin, that to be, according to its economic weight, just one of several EU members is something that doesn't come to his mind. He then saw how democracy and market economy was taking Russia down, because there was no real democracy and the economy was an oligarchic one or a very capitalistic one. And then Putin had decided that a junior partner role is not his. He gets his strength out of getting back to the old Russian Empire by opposing it, by being by a confrontational state, by raising again nationalism, everything. So was it a mistake? I think we were a bit naive, but could we, in particular we Germans, tell the Poles or even the Ukrainians today, we are telling them, but telling the Poles, the Hungarians, everybody, the countries that Germany was responsible for their destruction in the Second World War. Could we tell them, listen, sorry, you are geographically at the wrong place, and you cannot become member of EU, you cannot become member of NATO. You cannot, we Germans invaded you once, but we are not ready to protect you from a second invasion or from the Russians. I think there were dilemmas that one can deplore today, but we have to be realistic. What were the alternatives there?
I mean, the only point I would make is that membership of the European Union is different from membership of NATO. And sometimes prophecies become self-fulfilling. What is containment for one side is encirclement for the other. And at the point where dialogue breaks down, misinterpretation of intentions or intransigence can lead to complete deadlocks. I think it was not only, I'm sure that negotiating with Mr. Putin is not the easiest job one can wish anybody to have. I watched, or rather read, about President Macron's 6-hour ordeal of negotiations with Mr. Putin. I know it's not an easy thing, but at the same time, we may sometimes have abysmally failed in, even for a minute, putting ourselves in the shoes of the other side and try to understand his or her fears, his or her understanding and reading of history. But I don't think that disagreement is profound.
Yeah, no, it's a bit about what I said before. Yes, Putin earlier on said the biggest catastrophe was the end of the Soviet Union. the end of the Soviet Union for millions and millions of people meant freedom, liberty, democracy. So there is this, it's very difficult to have all this under one common umbrella. And I refuse a bit to always say, well, we have to, put ourselves in the shoe of one who doesn't like democracy, doesn't follow the universal values. Do we have to? Of course, the Ukrainians are paying a price for it. I wanted to pick up one point that you said, because there was, by the way, a change in attitude by Putin. The argument about EU membership and NATO membership, because it's true, he said that. But at some stage, he changed his view. He said at one conversation with the chancellor, when she made that point that you just made, said, well, when I look at the map, when I compare EU members with NATO members, it's practically the same. So once you're an EU member, you're also NATO member. So he has changed his position in that respect. But again, both on EU membership and NATO membership, neither Ukraine or Georgia has the concrete perspective. Contrary to the Balkans, the Eastern Partnership countries never get the EU membership perspective. And you're absolutely right. In 2008, in the Bucharest summit, it was more about Georgia and not really Ukraine, because in 2008, you remember, what's his name? Yushchenko, the president, and Timoshenko were getting at each other's throat, and it was not a country that was actually actively pursuing it. They were infighting, and it was a very immature country at the time. So it was never about Ukraine. Actually, the NATO never discussed really NATO membership, and the fact that it's offered the possibility of one day coming. This is what is in the OSCE, or in the CSCE Basic Act. This is what Putin himself in speeches said, that countries can choose which alliance they should enter. But he has changed his position.
I would like to pick up a topic that was raised by both of you. As we remember, all of us, the mess started 2014 when Yanukovych made a U-turn, and he suddenly didn't like the thing he has signed before, and the Maidan demonstration started in Kiev. This was about the European Union. This was not about NATO. So I would like to ask you, what is exactly the perspective, the European perspective of the post-Soviet Republic? Is there any? And can the European Union play a role there, except from saying some pleasant words to these countries?
Why don't you go first?
Okay. First, remember that a number of former Soviet republics are already full members of the European Union. I mean, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania used to be Soviet republics, and now they are luckily members of the European Union. And other countries that were members of the Warsaw Pact are also now members of the European Union. With Ukraine, it was rather complicated, because I'm afraid when the European Union thought of its Eastern Partnership agreements, and at some point the then president of the European Commission said that all association agreements would be everything but full membership, we did not really mean it. The European Union offered long-term perspectives, nice words, and not very concrete aid in those places. Yanukovych was interested at the time in signing an agreement until Mr. Putin decided to tell him that this was no-go area, and then he changed his mind. Brussels did not have much experience in power politics. They thought they would be discussing association agreements, trade and aid. And on the opposite side, there was somebody who was not extremely reluctant, to put it mildly, to resort to arms to get his point across. And that was Mr. Putin. And that was a very strange exchange between Brussels, the European Union, and Russia. I mean, it's an interesting confrontation between the postmodern and the post-imperial. And the post-imperial uses arms. The postmodern doesn't.
Interesting that we have now a return of the postmodern to the imperial one, because a few days ago the European Union decided to use the peace facility for sending arms to Ukraine. So back to the future. But you raise an interesting point there. Doing these when there was after Yanukovych, but then when also Poroshenko, but even during when Yanukovych, before Putin told him no, or Putin gave him 3 billion to say no, Chancellor Merkel was pushing, the Ukrainians was pushing also Barroso, the president at the time, to look closer at the Ukrainian economy, to see how somehow getting a customs agreement or an association then later on, make this somehow compatible with the Russian market. Because at the time in 2013, at 12-13, when it came up, there was the Vilnius summit, but before, Ukrainian trade was, to the much larger part, was with Russia. But it was also on the Ukrainian side, it was very much symbolic, and they didn't invest much into this question. So was the Commission, because the Commission is, when you sit in Brussels in your ivory tower, I hope nobody listens from Brussels here, you say that, well, the others have to implement your rules and no way that you adapt to others. A certain arrogance we see in Brussels. I worked there, so I know what I'm talking about. But today, after then everything happened, association agreement was signed. Today, the Ukrainian economy is to a vast part now oriented towards Europe. They are now integrated in Europe. Personally, I think that after what they have gone through, if Ukraine survives, I think we owe it to them, this is my personal view, that they get, as the Balkan countries, get a real perspective to become member of the European Union. But let me really say, but it has to be clear that before entering, they have to meet the criteria. I mean, we talk about the heroes in Kiev, but we are here not in public, but the way that Zelensky has handled the oligarchs, has handled the rule of law, has handled the anti-corruption, is, to say the least, is not the way we should expect it. So there's a lot of homework to be done in Ukraine. But I think with what they are going through, I think we need to extend the possibility to become member of the European Union. I think we have a moral obligation towards these people who suffer under these horrible power politics there.
I would fully agree with what you said. Yes, we are morally obliged to give a European Union perspective to Ukraine, recognizing, however, that the road towards paradise would be very long.
Yes, paradise.
Because, yeah, I mean, assuming the European Union is paradise, I'm simplifying a bit.
So we agree again.
I'm afraid so.
Yes. I think we have exhausted all topics. I think our moderator is getting...
We have exhausted this, and I am informed by the organizers that we're running out of our time. So I thank you very much for your contribution in that discussion. And hopefully will get as soon as possible out of that war.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure. I totally subscribe to what you said at the very beginning. We have to pray and do everything for these poor people there. This suffering is in the 21st century in Europe. I mean, I think all of us would have never imagined that this will come back. So thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much.